I need to tell you something tonight, and I'm terrified that once I say it out loud, there's no way to take it back. Not for me. Not for you. Not for whatever fragile, complicated thing has quietly been growing between us all this time. Because some decisions in life feel like experiments. You try them, you learn, you pivot. But this one feels irreversible. The kind of moment where your entire future leans forward and waits to see what you'll do. And right now I'm standing at the edge of that moment, holding a question that could either build a life or quietly break my heart. I've spent most of my life building things that people thought were impossible. Rockets. Electric cars. Companies that were supposed to fail. Risk has never scared me in business. In fact, I almost crave it. But love is a completely different system. There are no engineers running simulations. No backup launch windows. When it comes to you, every emotion feels untested, unstable, and strangely fragile. And the truth is, I've been delaying this moment longer than I want to admit. Not because I don't know how I feel, but because I know exactly how much it would hurt if you said no. You might think that someone like me is comfortable with uncertainty, that I'm used to betting everything on the unknown. But there's something about the possibility of losing you that feels different from any risk I've ever taken before. Businesses collapse, and you build another one. Rockets explode, and you redesign them. But a heart, once it realizes it was never truly chosen, it doesn't rebuild so easily. And that's why I've been quiet sometimes when I should have spoken. That's why there were moments when I looked at you and almost said the words that are now sitting heavily in my chest. Do you remember those small conversations we had that seemed ordinary at the time? The quiet ones. The ones where nothing dramatic happened. Because for me, those moments were never ordinary. They were data points in a strange emotional experiment my heart was running without my permission. Every smile you gave me, every thoughtful pause before you answered a question, every time your voice softened when you talked about the future, my mind was collecting signals. Signals that maybe, just maybe, you saw me not as the man the world talks about, but as the man who sits quietly across from you, wondering if he finally found something real. And I need to ask you something honestly, something that might feel uncomfortable, but it's important to me. When you think about us, about the possibility of us, do you ever feel that quiet pull too? Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but something slower, deeper. The kind of feeling that sneaks into your life without permission and suddenly makes you imagine a future you never planned for. Because that's what happened to me. You weren't supposed to change my plans. And yet somehow you did. The strange thing is, the closer I get to saying what I'm about to say, the more I realize how vulnerable this moment actually is. People think confidence means you never doubt yourself, that you always move forward without hesitation. But the truth is, the most important decisions in life come wrapped in hesitation. Because when something truly matters, you suddenly become aware of how much you could lose. And that's exactly where I am right now. Standing here emotionally, holding a question that could reshape everything between us. But before I say it, before I even allow myself to go that far, there's something small I want to ask you. If you're listening to this right now, quietly somewhere in the world, maybe late at night or early in the morning, consider subscribing so I know you're here with me on this strange, vulnerable journey. And if you feel comfortable, tell me where you're listening from, because it fascinates me how two lives can connect across distance in ways we never expected. Now, where was I? Right, the question. Because the truth is, tonight isn't just about love, it's about timing, about courage, about whether two people can recognize the moment when life quietly offers them something rare, and decide not to let it slip away. But here's the part I haven't admitted yet. Even though I'm preparing to ask you one of the most important questions a man can ask, there's a reason I've been hesitating. A reason deeper than fear. A reason I haven't told you. Not yet. You know, the strange thing about preparing to ask someone to spend their life with you is that the world suddenly becomes very quiet. Not externally, the world keeps moving, people keep talking, schedules keep filling up, rockets still launch, companies still run. But internally, something slows down. Every thought becomes heavier, every memory becomes sharper, and every possibility starts whispering questions you can't easily ignore. I've been living inside that quiet space lately, and in that silence, one thought keeps returning to me over and over again. What if I'm wrong about this? Not wrong about loving you, because that part has already settled somewhere deep in me in a way that feels undeniable. The kind of certainty that doesn't arrive loudly, but quietly roots itself until one day you realize it has been there the whole time. No, the doubt isn't about my feelings. The doubt is about whether I'm allowed to bring you into a life that has never been simple. My world has always been intense, chaotic, unpredictable. Some people see the ambition and the innovation, and they think it must be exciting. And it is. But what they don't always see are the long nights, the relentless pressure, the strange loneliness that sometimes hides behind big visions. And sometimes I look at you and wonder if inviting you into that storm would be unfair. Because love isn't just about what you feel in the beautiful moments. Anyone can love someone when everything is calm and bright. Real love reveals itself when life becomes difficult, when the stress is heavy, when decisions carry consequences that ripple far into the future. I've asked myself again and again, if I asked you to stand beside me in that kind of life, would I be giving you something meaningful, or would I be asking you to carry a weight you never chose? And here's something else I've been afraid to admit. There were moments when I almost convinced myself that the safest thing to do would be to say nothing at all, to keep what I feel quietly contained. To let us continue exactly as we are, existing in that comfortable space where nothing is defined and nothing can truly be lost. Because once you ask the question I'm thinking about asking, the entire relationship changes forever. There is no going back to the innocence of not knowing. Have you ever noticed how the most dangerous moments in life don't look dramatic from the outside? They look quiet, ordinary, two people talking, a small pause in a conversation, a simple sentence spoken at the wrong time, or the right one. But beneath that quiet surface, entire futures are shifting. Sometimes I watch you when you're not paying attention, and I wonder what your mind is doing in those moments. Are you thinking about tomorrow? About family? About the years ahead? Or do you ever imagine a version of your life where I'm standing somewhere in it, not as a passing chapter, but as something permanent? I ask myself that question more than I should probably admit, because the truth is, the closer I get to asking you to marry me, the more I realize how fragile this moment actually is. One answer could open the door to a lifetime together. Another answer could gently close a chapter that I secretly hoped would become our entire story. And maybe that's why I've been moving slowly. Maybe that's why there were times when I looked like I was about to say something important, and then I changed the subject. It wasn't uncertainty about you. It was uncertainty about whether this moment had truly arrived. But here's the part that complicates everything. There's something about this decision that you don't know yet. Something that has been quietly influencing every thought I've had about proposing to you. And the strange part is, if you understood it right now, you might actually question whether I should ask you at all. I've kept that truth hidden because once I reveal it, the entire situation becomes more complicated than it already is. And I'm not sure you're ready to hear it yet. But the moment is getting closer and I can't keep delaying forever. Sometimes I wonder if you realize how dangerous hope can be. Not the loud, optimistic kind people talk about in speeches, but the quiet hope that grows between two people when neither of them fully says what they're feeling. That kind of hope is subtle, almost invisible at first. It starts with small things, the way you look at each other when a conversation pauses, the strange comfort of silence when you're together, the feeling that time moves differently when the other person is in the room. And before you notice what's happening, that quiet hope begins to build a future in your imagination. I didn't plan for that to happen with you. My life has always been structured around big visions, massive systems, long timelines, Mars missions, technological revolutions, things measured in decades. Love was never supposed to be something that interrupted that structure. But somehow, without asking my permission, you started appearing in those future projections. Not as a distraction, but as a presence. And that realization unsettled me more than I expected. Because once your mind starts imagining a life with someone, it becomes almost impossible to return to the version of reality where they aren't there. Have you ever experienced that feeling? When someone quietly becomes part of your emotional landscape, and suddenly the idea of them disappearing feels strangely unbearable. That's the place I found myself standing in not long ago. I was thinking about the future, the real one, not the theoretical one, and a strange thought crossed my mind. What if I wait too long? What if I keep analyzing this moment the way engineers analyze problems, always searching for the perfect timing, the perfect conditions, and while I'm calculating, life quietly moves forward without me. Because love doesn't always wait patiently while we overthink it. And the uncomfortable truth is that I've been guilty of that. Overthinking. studying emotions like they're systems that can be optimized, trying to understand every variable before I make a decision. But you can't engineer love the way you engineer rockets. Human hearts don't run on predictable equations. Sometimes they move faster than logic. Sometimes they make decisions before the mind is ready. And that realization led me to a question I've been trying to answer for weeks now. If I lose you because I was too afraid to ask the question, will I ever forgive myself? That question has been echoing in my head at the strangest times. Late at night, during meetings, in quiet moments when the world slows down just enough for honest thoughts to surface. Because there's a possibility I can't ignore anymore, a possibility that frightens me more than rejection. The possibility that someone else might see you the way I see you. Have you ever thought about that? The idea that somewhere out there could be a man who hasn't hesitated. Someone who hasn't spent months analyzing the emotional consequences of love. Someone who simply feels something for you and decides to move forward without doubt. That thought unsettles me more than I expected. Because if that moment ever arrives, if another man steps into your life with certainty, while I'm still standing here thinking, then the decision will no longer belong to me. It will belong to you. And maybe that moment is closer than I realize. But before I allow myself to reach the point where I finally ask you the question that's been sitting between us, there's still something you don't know. Something I've been carrying quietly since the beginning. Something that might change the way you see everything I've said tonight. And the truth is, I almost told you earlier, but I stopped myself. Because once I say it, there's no pretending things are simple anymore. You know what fascinates me about moments like this? The way truth waits quietly in the background while we talk about everything else. Two people can circle around something important for a very long time, speaking about feelings, memories, possibilities, yet the real reason behind everything remains, hidden just beneath the surface. And the strange thing is, sometimes we hide that truth not because we want to deceive someone, but because saying it out loud changes the entire emotional landscape. That's the place I've been standing in with you. Because all these thoughts about proposing, all these reflections about timing and risk and love, they are real. Every word I've said comes from something genuine. But they aren't the whole story. They're only the outer layer of something deeper that I've been carrying quietly inside me for longer than you probably realize. I told you earlier that there was a reason I've been hesitating. Not just fear. Not just uncertainty. Something else. And I think the moment has come to admit something that may surprise you. I haven't told you the real reason yet. The truth is, this decision didn't begin recently. It didn't start the night I first thought about asking you to marry me. It didn't start during one of those quiet conversations we had where time seemed to slow down. No, if I'm being completely honest, the moment that started this entire emotional journey happened much earlier. Earlier than you might expect. There was a day, a very ordinary day on the surface, when I noticed something about you that changed the way I looked at everything. It wasn't dramatic. You weren't trying to impress anyone. In fact, I don't even think you realized anyone was paying attention. But in that moment, you revealed something about your character that most people hide behind layers of performance. You were kind, in a way that wasn't meant to be seen. And that may sound like a small thing, but to someone like me, someone who has spent years observing people, trying to understand their motivations, their ambitions, their hidden intentions, that moment was incredibly revealing. Because genuine kindness, the quiet kind that happens when no one is watching, is rare. And when you see it, you recognize it immediately. That moment stayed with me longer than it should have. At first, I dismissed it. I told myself I was overanalyzing a small interaction. My mind has a habit of turning simple things into complex reflections. But days passed, then weeks, and I kept noticing more things about you that felt different from the people I'm used to meeting. You listen carefully. You think before you speak. You carry a kind of emotional steadiness that most people lose as life becomes more complicated. And slowly, almost against my will, I started realizing something uncomfortable. You weren't just someone I enjoyed talking to. You were becoming someone I respected deeply. And respect, when it grows quietly between two people, has a strange way of transforming into something much more powerful. Something much harder to ignore. But here's the part where everything becomes complicated. Because around the time I started noticing those feelings, something else happened that forced me to question whether moving closer to you would be the right decision at all. A situation, a choice, and that choice created a possibility that I've been wrestling with ever since. a possibility that involves another woman. And before your mind jumps to the wrong conclusion, understand something carefully. What happened didn't mean I loved someone else, but it did create a moment where my future could have moved in a completely different direction. And the uncomfortable truth is, if one small decision had gone another way that day, I might not be sitting here tonight thinking about asking you to marry me. I've replayed that moment in my mind more times than I can count, because life has a strange habit of hiding its biggest turning points inside very small decisions. At the time it didn't feel dramatic. There was no music playing in the background, no sudden realization that the future was quietly shifting beneath my feet. It felt like an ordinary conversation, the kind that happens between adults who are trying to understand what direction their lives might take next. But when I look back at it now, I realize that conversation was standing directly between two completely different versions of my future. The woman I mentioned, she wasn't someone random who appeared out of nowhere. She was intelligent, thoughtful, and in many ways exactly the kind of person the world would expect me to end up with. Our lives overlapped in ways that made sense on paper. Our schedules aligned, our ambitions pointed in similar directions, and if someone had drawn a logical diagram of what a compatible partnership might look like, her name could have easily appeared inside it. And that's exactly why the situation became so dangerous emotionally, because logic was telling me one thing, while something deeper inside me was quietly resisting it. We had a conversation about the future that day, a calm, rational conversation about what two people might build together if they decided to move forward. No pressure, no emotional drama, just the kind of discussion adults have when they're evaluating life decisions. And as she spoke, explaining what she imagined our lives could look like, I remember noticing something strange happening inside me. Everything she said made sense. But nothing she said made my heart move. Have you ever experienced that feeling? When someone offers you something that is objectively good, stable, intelligent, promising, yet somewhere deep inside you there's a quiet stillness where excitement should be. It's not rejection. It's not dislike. It's something subtler, almost like your soul is waiting for a signal that never arrives. That's exactly what happened to me in that moment. I remember sitting there listening carefully, respecting her honesty, appreciating the clarity of what she was offering, and at the same time realizing that my mind kept drifting somewhere else. Not toward another conversation, not toward another ambition, toward you. Not because I had already decided anything about us. At that time I hadn't even allowed myself to imagine proposing to you, but your presence in my mind was enough to create a strange emotional contrast. Because when I thought about a future with her, everything looked correct, logical, structured. But when I thought about you, everything felt alive, and that difference terrified me, because logic is safe. Logic builds predictable lives. Logic prevents mistakes. But love, the real kind, rarely follows logic. It appears suddenly and demands emotional risks that intelligent people spend their entire lives trying to avoid. So in that moment I had to make a decision. Not publicly, not dramatically, quietly. I had to decide whether I would follow the path that made sense to the world, or the path that made sense to my heart. And the truth is, I almost chose the wrong one. For a few days after that conversation, I tried convincing myself that the logical path would be easier. I told myself that love grows with time, that stability matters more than emotional intensity. That maybe the quiet pull I felt toward you was simply curiosity, not something powerful enough to shape an entire life. But the more I tried to believe that, the more something inside me resisted. Because every time I imagined moving forward without you somewhere in my future, something inside me felt strangely empty. And that emptiness forced me to confront a question I had been avoiding. If I chose safety over feeling, would I spend the rest of my life wondering what could have happened with you? That question changed everything. But even after realizing that, even after quietly stepping away from the path that would have taken me toward her, I still didn't move toward you right away, because another fear had started growing inside me. A fear that maybe, by the time I finally gathered the courage to ask you to marry me, it might already be too late. That possibility, the one I mentioned a moment ago, the thought that it might already be too late, it has been sitting quietly in the back of my mind for longer than you probably realize. And the strange thing is, that fear didn't appear suddenly. It grew slowly, almost invisibly, the way uncertainty tends to grow when two people care about each other, but neither of them is brave enough to define what they are becoming. After I stepped away from the other path, the one that seemed logical, the one that the world would have easily understood, I told myself something very simple. I told myself that if my heart kept returning to you, if that quiet pull didn't disappear with time, then eventually I would stop overthinking and finally ask you the question that had already begun forming in my mind. But life doesn't pause while we sort out our emotions. Days move forward. People meet new people. Opportunities quietly appear. And that's when something happened that made my hesitation feel suddenly dangerous. I started noticing small changes around you. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that anyone else would probably notice. But when you care about someone, you become sensitive to the smallest emotional signals. A new brightness in your voice during certain conversations. A subtle shift in the way you speak about your plans. Moments when your attention drifts somewhere else, as if another possibility has quietly entered your life. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. The human mind has a talent for creating stories when it lacks information. But the thought wouldn't leave me alone. And once a question like that enters your mind, it begins quietly reshaping every interaction. So, I started asking myself something uncomfortable. Is there someone else? Not in an accusatory way, not with jealousy, but with genuine curiosity. Because if another man had appeared in your life during the time I was standing here, hesitating, then my silence might already have cost me something I can never recover. And that realization did something strange to me. For the first time in a very long time, I felt something close to panic. Not the chaotic panic people imagine when they think about fear, but a quieter version. The kind that settles deep in your chest and makes you suddenly aware that the window for a certain decision might be closing. Because love doesn't operate on unlimited timelines. Sometimes there are moments where two lives are aligned perfectly. And if you miss that moment, the paths slowly begin to separate. I remember sitting alone one night, thinking about this possibility, and I asked myself a question that was almost painful to consider. What if she's already moving on, and I'm the only one who hasn't realized it yet? That thought forced me to confront something about myself that I didn't like very much. For someone who is willing to risk billions of dollars on impossible technology, I had been incredibly cautious when it came to risking my heart. I had analyzed, calculated, observed, waited for the perfect emotional conditions, the way an engineer waits for the perfect launch window. But love doesn't wait for perfect launch windows. Love moves, and if you move too slowly, someone else might step forward while you're still thinking. So I began replaying every conversation we had recently, trying to understand whether there were signals I had ignored. Was there a moment where you were quietly waiting for me to say something and I failed to recognize it? Was there a day when you almost opened the door for a deeper conversation and I changed the subject because I wasn't ready? Those questions can be brutally honest when you allow yourself to face them. Because the truth is, there may have been moments when you were wondering the exact same thing about me. Moments when you asked yourself whether I truly saw you, or whether I was just another man passing through your life without the courage to stay. And that possibility, the possibility that my silence might have already hurt you, that thought is heavier than the fear of rejection. Because rejection at least comes with clarity. Silence leaves questions that echo for years. And that's when something shifted inside me. For the first time since this entire emotional journey began, I stopped thinking about the risk of asking you to marry me. And I started thinking about the risk of never asking at all. Because there is a kind of regret that people carry quietly for the rest of their lives, the regret of a question they were too afraid to ask when the moment still existed. And I realized something that night. If I lose you because you choose someone else, that will hurt. But if I lose you because I was too afraid to speak, that would be a regret I could never forgive myself for. Still, even after reaching that realization, even after finally admitting that I can't stay silent forever, there's another layer of this story you still don't know. Another truth I've been holding back. And the reason I've delayed telling you is because once you understand it, you might start questioning whether saying yes to me would actually make you happy. The truth I've been hesitating to reveal isn't something dramatic in the way people usually expect secrets to be dramatic. There's no betrayal hiding behind it, no scandal, no sudden twist that would make headlines. In fact, on the surface it may even sound ordinary. But sometimes the quiet truths are the ones that carry the heaviest emotional weight because they force us to confront the parts of ourselves we rarely show anyone. And this particular truth has been shaping every thought I've had about asking you to marry me. You see, Most people who look at my life from the outside assume something about me that isn't entirely accurate. They see ambition, intensity, constant motion. They imagine a man who thrives inside chaos, someone who is comfortable living at the edge of impossible ideas. And, in many ways, that image is correct. My life has always been built around big risks and big visions. But what very few people understand is what that kind of life quietly does to a person's inner world. Because when you spend years chasing enormous goals, you become accustomed to pressure. Deadlines, failures, public criticism, impossible expectations, they become normal. You learn to carry stress the way other people carry routine. But somewhere along the way something subtle begins to happen. The emotional parts of life, the simple parts, the gentle parts, start slipping further away. Not because you don't value them, but because you don't know how to slow down enough to protect them. And that realization is the real reason I've been hesitating. Because when I imagine asking you to marry me, the question isn't just about whether you love me. The question is whether I could truly give you the kind of life you deserve. Not the exciting version people see in headlines, but the quiet, human version of life that happens behind closed doors. The version where two people wake up next to each other in the morning and build something stable together. Sometimes I look at you and wonder if bringing you into my world would mean asking you to live inside storms you never chose. My schedule is unpredictable. My responsibilities don't pause. There are nights when work consumes every hour, moments when decisions carry consequences for thousands of people, sometimes millions. And in those moments, the emotional presence that love requires, the attention that a partner deserves, can become difficult to protect. That's the part no one talks about when they imagine what it would be like to share a life with someone like me. And I've been asking myself a question that refuses to go away. Would loving me eventually feel like standing next to a man who is always being pulled somewhere else? Because if the answer to that question is yes, then asking you to marry me might not be an act of love. It might be an act of selfishness. That thought has been haunting me more than the fear of rejection, because I've watched relationships in my life struggle under the weight of ambition. I've seen how easily love can be pushed aside when the world demands constant attention. And the last thing I ever want is to look into your eyes years from now and realize that my life pulled you away from the happiness you could have had somewhere else. So there were moments, more than I'd like to admit, when I seriously considered stepping back. Not because I stopped loving you, but because loving you made me question whether I had the right to ask you for something as permanent as marriage. And that internal conflict became stronger every time I imagined the moment itself. The proposal. The question. The way your eyes might look when you realize what I'm asking. Because if I ask you to marry me, I'm not just asking for your love, I'm asking for your patience, your resilience, your willingness to walk beside a life that doesn't always move slowly or gently. And that's a lot to ask from someone who deserves peace. So the conflict inside me has been growing louder. One voice says, tell her the truth. Ask her to build a life with you. The other voice says, if you truly care about her, maybe you should let her choose an easier future. And the hardest part is, both voices come from love. But something happened recently that made this conflict even more intense. Something that forced me to realize that the time for quiet thinking might already be over. Because I saw something, a small moment, that made me believe I might already be losing you. I didn't expect that moment to affect me the way it did. It was small, almost insignificant on the surface. The kind of scene most people would barely notice before moving on with their day. But when you care about someone the way I care about you, even the smallest shift in the emotional atmosphere can feel enormous. You were talking to someone. Not in a secretive way, not in a way that suggested you were doing anything wrong. It looked natural, easy, comfortable. You were smiling in that quiet way you have when you feel safe in a conversation. And the man standing there with you looked relaxed, confident, completely unaware that somewhere across the room there was another man watching the moment unfold and suddenly realizing something he hadn't allowed himself to feel before. Jealousy. Not the loud, possessive kind that makes people angry. No, what I felt was quieter and much more unsettling. It was the realization that you are not something the world placed in my life exclusively. You are a person with choices, with possibilities, with a future that could easily include someone who is not me. And standing there watching that simple interaction forced a question into my mind that I had been avoiding for months. What if she chooses him? The thought appeared suddenly and refused to leave. I tried to reason with myself. I told myself there was no evidence of anything meaningful happening between you. Two people talking does not mean they are building a future together. Adults have conversations every day without romantic implications. My rational mind understood that perfectly. But my heart didn't care about rational explanations in that moment. Because when you see someone you love sharing that effortless comfort with another person, something inside you begins to imagine possibilities you wish you could ignore. What if he asks you something before I do? What if he's the kind of man who doesn't spend months analyzing his emotions? What if he simply sees you, recognizes your value immediately, and decides he's not willing to risk losing you by staying silent? Standing there with those thoughts running through my mind felt strangely destabilizing. I've spent my life competing in industries where the stakes are enormous, where billions of dollars and years of work depend on the outcome of a single decision. But none of those situations ever created the particular vulnerability I felt in that moment. Because those competitions are public. This one was painfully personal. And the most uncomfortable realization of all was this: if you ever chose another man, I would have no one to blame but myself. Not you, not him. Myself, because I would know, deep down, that I had every opportunity to speak honestly about what I feel, and instead I chose hesitation. That realization followed me for days after that moment. Every time I tried to focus on work, my thoughts drifted back to the same question. What if my silence is quietly pushing her towards someone else? It's a brutal thought when you allow yourself to sit with it long enough, because sometimes the greatest risk in life isn't the possibility of rejection. Sometimes the greatest risk is allowing fear to delay a decision until the moment disappears completely. And I started noticing something else during those days. The way you spoke about the future had begun to change slightly. Not dramatically. But there were hints. Small suggestions that you were thinking about where your life might be going next. New plans. New possibilities. And each time I heard those reflections, I found myself searching for a place where I might exist inside that future you were imagining. Sometimes I could see it. Sometimes I couldn't. And that uncertainty began to press on me in ways I wasn't prepared for. Because the longer I waited, the more I realized something uncomfortable. Your life was moving forward, with or without my decision. And suddenly the question I had been carefully analyzing for months no longer felt like a philosophical reflection about love. It felt like a race against time. That's when the emotional pressure inside me started reaching a point I could no longer comfortably manage. Because once you recognize that you might already be close to losing someone, the mind begins asking questions that are impossible to silence. Questions like, what if the next time I see her smile like that, it's because someone else asked the question I was too afraid to ask? And the truth is, that possibility nearly broke something inside me. I didn't sleep much after that realization. Not because I was overwhelmed by jealousy or anger. Those emotions pass quickly when you allow logic to examine them. What kept me awake was something quieter and far more difficult to confront. Regret. Not the regret of something I had done wrong, but the creeping realization that I might be standing at the edge of losing something precious simply because I waited too long to act. There's a particular kind of night when your mind refuses to rest. The world outside is quiet, the clock moves slowly, and every thought feels louder than it should. That was the kind of night I found myself living through. I kept replaying every moment we had shared. Conversations that once felt casual suddenly looked different when I viewed them through the possibility that they might already belong to the past. Do you know what surprised me the most? It wasn't the big memories that hurt. It was the small ones. The way you laugh when something genuinely amuses you. The thoughtful pauses you take before answering a question. The calm steadiness in your voice when a conversation becomes serious. Those details, the quiet human details, began appearing in my mind one after another, and with each memory a strange question followed. What if those moments are already finished, and I didn't realize it while they were happening? It's a terrifying thought when you let it settle fully in your chest, because we like to believe that important chapters in our lives end with clear signals. Dramatic goodbyes. Emotional clarity. Something that tells us the story has closed. But real life isn't that neat. Sometimes the most important chapter of your life quietly fades away while you're still assuming there will be more pages. And somewhere around the middle of that long, restless night, something inside me cracked open emotionally. I finally admitted a truth I had been resisting since the beginning of this entire journey. I am in love with you. Not in the casual, uncertain way people sometimes use those words. not as a hopeful possibility or a romantic idea. No, the kind of love I feel for you is the kind that quietly rearranges your internal world without asking permission. The kind that makes you imagine waking up next to the same person 20 years from now and feeling strangely peaceful about the idea. And realizing that truth at 3 in the morning, alone with my thoughts, created an emotional pressure that was almost unbearable. Because if that love is real, then remaining silent about it is no longer cautious. It's cowardly. That realization forced me to face something about myself that I had been avoiding. For all the risks I take in my professional life, I had been protecting myself from the single risk that actually matters most. The risk of asking someone to choose you. And once I accepted that truth, the emotional dam I had built inside myself began to collapse. I started imagining the moment I might finally ask you the question that has been waiting in my heart all this time. The way your eyes might look when you realize what I'm saying. The silence that would follow. The fragile seconds where everything hangs in the balance. And then another thought appeared, one that was almost unbearable to consider. What if you say no? Not because you don't care about me, but because my silence already convinced you that I never truly chose you. That possibility hurt more than the idea of rejection itself, because it would mean that my hesitation didn't just delay the moment. It changed the story. And for a brief moment that night, I almost convinced myself that I had already waited too long, that the safest way to protect both of us from disappointment would be to simply step away from the question entirely. To accept that sometimes love arrives, but timing fails. But just as that thought was beginning to settle into something that felt like quiet surrender, another realization appeared that changed everything. A realization so clear, so undeniable, that it made every fear I had been holding on to suddenly feel small. Because in that moment I understood something about love that no amount of careful thinking had shown me before. If you truly love someone, you don't protect yourself from the answer. You ask the question anyway. And that realization finally led me to the decision I've been circling around this entire time. A decision that brings me to the moment I've been preparing to face. The moment where I stop thinking and start speaking. When that realization settled inside me, something changed in a way that is difficult to explain unless you have experienced it yourself. All the noise that had been living in my mind for months, the analysis, the caution, the quiet fear of rejection, suddenly began to fade into the background. It didn't disappear completely, but it lost its authority. And in the silence that followed, a much simpler truth stood in front of me. I love you. Not in a theoretical way. Not as a possibility that still needs testing. Not as a beautiful idea that might someday grow into something real. No. The truth was already fully formed, and the only thing missing was the courage to say it out loud. For so long I had been treating love the way I treat innovation, as something that requires careful modeling, risk assessment, and timing strategies. I wanted to make sure the conditions were right, the signals were clear, the outcome had the highest probability of success. That mindset works well when you're building rockets. It works when you're designing technology meant to survive extreme conditions. But human hearts don't follow engineering logic, and somewhere along this long emotional journey, I had forgotten something very simple. The purpose of love isn't to eliminate risk. The purpose of love is to choose someone even when risk exists. That realization made me sit quietly for a long time, just thinking about you. Not about the future in abstract terms, not about the pressure of my world, not about the fear of losing you. Just about you as a person, your calm presence, your quiet strength, the thoughtful way you listen when someone speaks, the kindness that appears in small moments when you believe no one is watching. Those things matter more than any strategic calculation I had been trying to make, because when you strip away all the noise of life, what remains is the simple question every human heart eventually faces. Who do I want beside me when the world becomes uncertain? And every time I asked myself that question honestly, the answer was always the same. You. Not because you complete me in some dramatic romantic sense. I've always believed that two people should be whole individuals before they decide to build a life together. But you bring something into my world that I didn't even realize I was missing. You bring balance. My life moves fast. It's filled with urgency, ambition, relentless motion. But when I'm around you, something slows down in a way that feels incredibly grounding. Conversations become deeper. Silence becomes comfortable instead of awkward. The future feels less like a battlefield of challenges and more like a place where two people might actually build something meaningful together. That realization was the moment when my fear finally lost its power. Because I understood something that had been hiding behind all my hesitation. The real risk wasn't that you might say no. The real risk was that I might allow fear to steal a future that could have been beautiful for both of us. So I started imagining the moment when I would finally stand in front of you and speak the words I had been holding back. Not as a dramatic performance. Not as a grand spectacle meant to impress anyone watching. Just an honest conversation between two people. Because love, when it's real, doesn't need theatrical gestures to prove itself. It only needs truth. And the truth I want to tell you is this. From the moment I began noticing the quiet depth of your character, something inside me started paying attention in a way it rarely does. My life has been filled with extraordinary people, brilliant minds, ambitious visionaries, but very few of them carry the emotional steadiness that you carry so naturally. You make people feel seen. You make conversations feel meaningful. And without trying to, you create a sense of warmth that draws people closer to you. Those qualities might seem simple, but they are incredibly rare. And they are exactly the kind of qualities that make someone extraordinary in the ways that actually matter. That's why the thought of losing you began to frighten me more than I expected. Because people like you don't appear in life very often. When they do, they quietly change the emotional landscape of everyone around them. You changed mine. And the moment I finally accepted that truth was the moment I understood that my hesitation had lasted long enough. Because love is not meant to be stored quietly inside someone's chest forever. It's meant to be spoken. So here I am now, finally standing at the emotional edge I've been approaching throughout this entire journey. Every doubt, every fear, every moment of hesitation has brought me to this point. And what surprises me most is how calm I feel right now. Not because I know what your answer will be, but because I finally know what my heart wants to say. I want to build a life with you, not a perfect life. Perfection doesn't exist for anyone. My world will always have challenges, responsibilities, unpredictable moments where ambition pulls me in many directions. But what I can promise you is honesty, loyalty, and a deep respect for the partnership that marriage represents. Because marriage, at its best, is not about possession. It's about choosing each other again and again as life continues to change. And that's the choice I want to make with you. I want to wake up beside you years from now and still feel grateful that we were brave enough to take this risk together. I want to share the quiet mornings and the complicated evenings, the victories and the moments when things don't go according to plan. I want to build something lasting, not just companies or technology, but a partnership that grows stronger as time moves forward. And that brings me to the question that has been waiting patiently behind every word I've spoken tonight. The question that terrified me for so long. The question that now feels surprisingly simple. I'm going to ask you something that could change both of our lives forever. Not because I expect perfection, but because I believe what we have is real. So I need you to answer me honestly, without pressure, without obligation, just with the truth that lives inside your heart. Will you marry me? Will you take this unpredictable, beautiful risk with me and build a future that neither of us could create alone? Because if your answer is yes, then everything that happens after this moment becomes a story we write together. And if your answer is no, I will still be grateful for the courage it took to ask the question. But I have a feeling about you. A feeling that the quiet connection we've been building all this time wasn't accidental. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, you've been standing at the same emotional edge I've been standing on, waiting for someone to finally speak the words first. So here they are. All the hesitation is gone now. All the questions have been asked. All that remains is your answer. And whatever that answer may be, I want you to know something important. Meeting you changed me. It reminded me that even in a life filled with ambition and impossible ideas, the most meaningful thing we can build is a relationship where two people feel safe enough to be completely themselves. And that is a future worth fighting for.